Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another League of Women Voters of Tennessee webinar on issues that concern us all. Tonight, we're talking about capital punishment. We have two distinguished guests. Professor Karina Lane, Richmond Law Scholar and one of the nation's foremost experts on capital punishment. She'll share insights from her groundbreaking new book, Secrets of the Killing State, The Untold Story of Lethal Injection. Also, Reverend Stacey Richter, Executive Director of Tennesseans for Alternatives to the Death Penalty, an organization committed to honoring life, preventing violence, and supporting victims of violent crime. Before we actually turn it over to our speakers, I just want to remind everyone that we will be keeping you on mute. Please address your questions to the chat. We'll have time at the end to ask those questions. And if your question is for a specific individual, if you wouldn't mind specifying that in the chat. We should end in an hour, and we always may end early. You never know. So without further explanation, we're going to turn it over to Reverend Stacey Rector.
Wonderful. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for taking the time on a winter's night to join us to talk about the death penalty. Not the most uplifting topic, but a very important one, particularly right now in Tennessee. Um, I'm grateful, Marilyn, for your work on this and for inviting us and to all of you. Um, our organization, Tennesseans for Alternatives to the Death Penalty, as Marilyn said, is a statewide organization working to honor life by ending the death penalty, preventing violence, and supporting victims of violent crime. We believe that all those things are deeply connected. The reality that almost everyone on death row is a victim of violence first. And so, how do we stem the cycle of violence? How do we stop it? How do we get to people who've been harmed and help them to heal from their trauma? And is the death penalty something that is a tool for that? And we would obviously not agree that it is. Um, we educate. That's our main work is educating people and empowering people in Tennessee to get activated to do something about this broken system. And particularly, we are working closely with people who are directly impacted, people who've been exonerated from death row after spending decades sometimes for crimes they didn't commit, people who are victims of violence themselves or surviving family members of murder victims who don't think that the death penalty is serving them, members of corrections, people who are being asked to carry out executions on our behalf. And I'm sure Karina may say more about that. But we are working with lots of folks who are impacted by the ripple effects of the death penalty. And there are many ripple effects of it. Um, I will say that just a couple hours ago, we got word that Governor Lee has denied Harold Wayne Nichols clemency, which is very disappointing for all of us who've been working so hard to try to get the governor to intervene. That means that as of right now, that execution is moving forward. That is set for Thursday. Will be the third if it is carried out this year in Tennessee, with four more scheduled for next year. Um, and so, since I myself need some good news, given this turn of events, I thought that that would be a great way to start some of the comments that I want to make about the death penalty. And there's plenty of negative to say, but there is actually some real positive. And so I kind of want to start there before I dig into some of the more troublesome aspects. Right now, we are at a point in this country where 23 states have ended the death penalty completely. It is off the books. Virginia was the last state to do that, a very active death penalty state in the South, which was an accomplishment. When you include states that haven't carried out executions in a decade or more, you're up to two-thirds of states that either have legally abolished it or have not used it, don't use it in practice. So 33 out of 50 states. And there are some that are on the cusp. They're not there yet. States like Ohio. So that's good news. Um, More good news. Public opinion is at a 50-year low. Gallup just came out with its brand new poll, fresh off the hot off the press. And we are now at one of the lowest levels in 50 years, with just 52% of people saying that they support the death penalty. This is about what the opinion polls said at the time the death penalty was found to be unconstitutional back in 1972. It's roughly the same number. Um, we also know that less than half of all adults ages 18 to 54 support the death penalty. So the younger generations, and I love that 54 is still in there because that's how old I am. It makes me feel great. Um, those folks are not nearly as supportive of the death penalty. And here in Tennessee in 2022, a Vanderbilt poll showed that 53% of Tennesseans will choose an alternative sentence to the death penalty if they're given an option, right? If you just straight up ask people, are you for the death penalty, yes or no? You're going to get a higher number of people saying yes. But if you say, for first degree murder, what do you prefer? The death penalty, life without the possibility of parole, a life sentence, you're going to get more people choosing something besides the death penalty. So that's really positive, and I think that's important for us right now to keep in mind, given what's happening in Tennessee and some of the things that are going on around the country. The other thing I want to say about the good news is that um, it's easy to get very demoralized for those of us who do this work every day when we do see these executions moving forward. It's tough. But what I try to remind folks again is that these metrics like public support being low is a positive. Death sentencing, and I think this is one of the biggest indicators of where the public actually is on the death penalty, is sentencing. Our jury sentencing people to death right now. In Tennessee, we've only had 4 new death sentences since 2013. Okay? For reference, in 1991, we had 12 death sentences in 1 year. Okay? That's significant progress or in the right direction. Just in October, a Chattanooga jury returned life without parole for someone who was being tried capitally and had been found guilty. So again, these are the indicators that show me that the public has really lost its taste for the death penalty. The spate of executions we're seeing now is really, I think, I mean, there's multiple reasons, but at least 2 of those reasons are, one, it's coming from the top down. It's not coming from the public, the grassroots. It's coming from um, uh, president and governors there's pressure being exerted to carry out executions right now, and also that Tennessee has a very old death row. We have, given the new death sentencing, right? We have the majority of people on our death row, 40 plus people, were sentenced there in a different time. So we are now executing people from a different era. Harold Nichols has been on death row here since 1990, right? The crime occurred in 89. And so what we see is that many of these cases that now these men are moving toward execution, were they tried today, would not get the death penalty. Right? So these are some things that I think are positive. And the fact that we have been able to do the education to show the public that no matter how hard we try to tweak this system and do massage it here and massage it there, it is still failing to get it right all the time. It is failing to be fair. It is failing to deter the next crime from occurring. It is costing us millions upon millions of our tax dollars to try to execute people who are already incarcerated, who are not a threat to the public. And those are dollars we are not spending to support victims' services and people who have experienced the horror of murder, to solve cold cases in our state, which is roughly 50%, I think, of our cold case, our homicides go unsolved. Maybe a little less than that, but it's hovering right around there. Um, and on prevention, things that we actually know would help to keep our uh, violent crime rates down. So it's we really are trying to make a very practical argument in many ways, particularly to our policymakers, is that what we're doing now, doubling down on something that has not shown to be actually making us safer, is not the way to go. And spending lots and lots of money to do that and risking the execution of innocent people. Um, how am I on time? Am I doing okay? Okay. Um, so just a few of the things when we talk about the death penalty and where we see the real concerns and the failures are really around fairness, cost, and accuracy, are kind of the three ways I talk about it. And obviously, we all come at this. We all have our different moral and philosophical and biblical approaches to this. Obviously, we're in Tennessee, and I get a lot of scripture quoted at me around this issue, right? You may have had that happen too. And those are great conversations and important conversations to have. And I enjoy having them. But I think where we're finding the more common ground is when we move beyond sort of, do we think certain folks deserve to be executed? And instead talk about, does the system we have actually work? Is it actually giving us anything for what it's doing? Is it a positive or a detraction? And I would obviously argue that it's a detraction. So and these are probably, many of these things are things that you all are gonna may already know, but it's important to sort of reiterate when we talk about the application of the death penalty, the amount of money you have in your bank account, the color of the victim, also the color of the person who's being charged, but even more impactful, we see race of victim making an impact. So amount of money you have, race of the victim, the county that you live in, and whether or not you have a vulnerability such as a mental illness, a brain injury, horrible trauma in your childhood. These are the factors that are going to be more determinative of whether or not you end up on death row than the crime itself. And we see this in Tennessee, specifically around county based populations. Half of death row in our state comes from one county. That's Shelby County. And probably many of you all could have guessed that. And there's all sorts of historical and cultural reasons why that is true. Davidson County, where Nashville is, as big as Shelby, um, only about 10% come from Nashville. So you see such a stark contrast there, which means that you could be charged with a crime, the same crime in Memphis and Nashville, and in Nashville you could get a life sentence with parole eligibility. And in Memphis you may get the death penalty for the exact same thing. And that's all county based. Um, Over 75% of executions in the modern era, which is, roughly 1976 and forward, and Karina may speak more to that, but 75% of executions in the modern era had white victims, when only about half of all homicide victims are white. And we see race playing out in jury selection. There's so many ways in which race continues to play out in the system that are very problematic. And obviously the vulnerability of people with mental illness, intellectual disability, children who've grown up in horrific trauma and have acted out of trauma later in life. That's what we've seen with Harold Nichols, a man who grew up with horrific violence and sexual violence for his entire childhood and teenage years, and then acted out of that. Byron Black with an intellectual disability that everyone affirmed, except one judge decided that he would not accept the expert's opinion and the district attorney's opinion. And so Byron Black was executed despite his intellectual disability. So these factors also lend people to getting the death penalty. Um, I've talked about costs, extremely expensive, millions more per case over the life of a case to pursue the death penalty through an execution than to sentence someone to life or life without parole. It's just far, far more expensive. Again, resources we could be using to invest in victim services, in prevention, in helping to solve unsolved crimes. Last thing I'll say on this is, you know, all of it is concerning, but when you think about innocent people being executed, which we know that that has happened, um, we are now at 201 people since 1973 who have been exonerated from death row after a court or someone finally considered it and acted on it. There are others who have evidence that have not been able to get courts to do anything with it. Um, but that's 201 people, three of whom are from Tennessee. Um, what that means is that for roughly about every 8 or 9 executions we've had in this country in that modern era of the death penalty, we've let someone go because we were wrong. And those are just the people we figured it out in time. That's pretty staggering when you think about that statistic. And the fact, in my mind, that alone should be enough for us to say if we have alternatives that don't risk executing innocent people and that are less expensive, why do we continue to do this? Part of the work that we are doing is work around victim support. And we were able a couple of years ago to work with victims advocates in Tennessee to expand the Victims Compensation Fund here, which is a fund of last resort for people who have been victims of violence, um, who need help perhaps burying a loved one, with counseling services, lost wages. They need help recovering some of that. What we found was with all the talk about victims being, centered when we are talking about things like the death penalty or very excessive punishment, what we discovered was that Tennessee had one of the highest rates in the country of denying people help when they applied for it. In 2023, we denied 70% of victims of violence who applied for help. And those are just the people that actually were able to go through this pretty arduous process that they have to go through to apply. So what we've determined is, and we're out there, we expanded the law. We're going to keep working at it, keep getting people information. We've started a campaign called Heal People, Heal People. My colleague Rafia Muhammad McCormick, her son was murdered in 2020, and Rafia is absolutely dedicated and impassioned about how do we lift up the voices of victims, particularly victims of color who are often overlooked in these conversations in our state, to empower those folks to speak for themselves and say, look, the death penalty doesn't impact me, right? I need help with my rent because I'm so depressed that I can't get out of bed and I'm going to lose my house. Or my children need mental health counseling and we can't afford it and we need somebody to help us. Like these are the things that we know can actually really help people to heal. Death penalty, not so much. Um, Final thing I'll say, because I'm at time. As I mentioned, we have had 2 executions this year here in Tennessee. Um, Today, with Harold Nichols, we did, and this hopefully segues right into Karina, what you're about to talk about. But one of the real problems with lethal injection is that most states have laws that they pass to protect their secrecy laws, to protect the source of the drugs that they're purchasing for lethal injection and the identities of those carrying out lethal injection. What Department of Corrections have done, though, is basically use those very specific pieces of the law that are confidential and basically said, we're not giving you anything. We're just basically going to say, we're not turning anything over. With Byron Black's execution in August, some of you may have followed it. Mr. Black gasped. He raised his head. He said it hurt so bad. This went on for some time. His autopsy showed exactly what his attorney, Kelly Henry, argued was going to happen, exactly what Karina talks about happening, which is pulmonary edema, lungs filling up with fluid without proper anesthetization, which means that he basically drowned in his own fluid and was sensate while that was happening. So we have that just having happened with this new protocol that Tennessee enacted earlier this year. Harold Nichols, who is supposed to be executed by lethal injection in 2 days, his attorney said, we need all the records that you have, except for the confidential pieces about the expiration dates on the drugs. Have you tested the drugs? All these things. The TDOC continues to say, nope, we're not turning them over. Today, a Knox County Chancery Court judge said, yes, you are. You're turning everything over. I need to see everything. You all have been denying and denying and denying requests for this information. So we don't know how that may impact things moving forward. This judge doesn't have the ability to stop the execution, but it affirms what we've been saying, what the attorneys have been saying for so long, which is the state continues to hide behind the secrecy law and shield itself from being transparent with the public about exactly what's going on with lethal injection. And with that, segue to Karina.
That was great. Thanks so much, Stacy, for all of that information. I assume everyone can hear me out there. Okay, great, fantastic. So I'm Karina Lane, and I am a law professor. I am a death penalty researcher. So I have been studying the death penalty, researching and writing about it for 24 years now. And so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my recent work, but I want you to know, in this really nice group, that I'm going to try to move a little bit, fast so that we can leave time for Q&A because, I what I most want to talk about is what you want to talk about. So I'll give you some information that I have, and then we can move on. Again, I can go pretty much anywhere you want to go, just because I've been studying this stuff for so long. So I happened upon a project that insisted upon being a book. The book is called Secrets of the Killing State. The Untold Story. Uh-oh, there you go. Well, there you go. The Untold Story of Lethal Injection. And it represents 7 years of deep research across the country into lethal injection and into executions. So, and I'll just tell you, I didn't want to write a book. I ended up writing a book. There's a whole story behind that, but what I really want to say is I'm not so much an advocate. I mean, I am because of what I know, but there's advocacy like this sort of advocacy that Stacy does. And I want you to know I'm coming at you not so much from the advocacy world, but from the research world. And so what I thought I'd do is just tell you some stuff that I didn't know. That's what I thought I'd do. Here's some stuff that I didn't know that when I was researching it, I said, what? Everybody ought to know this. Everybody, because this is what the state does in your name. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about lethal injection, and then I've got some things that I want you to know that everyone should know about the death penalty more broadly. So when it comes to lethal injection, my research question really was what many of you are probably thinking now, which is what I was thinking, which is like, why are states so bad at this? We know how to put down our beloved pets, right? Like we do this all the time. We know how physician-assisted suicide works. We put people under anesthesia and cut open their chests and do all of these painful things every single day. So, why are states so bad at lethal injection? And that includes Tennessee. For me, again, mine it was a national study that included Tennessee. But, why am I seeing 3 hour long executions? Why am I seeing 2 hour long executions? Why am I seeing people waking up in the middle of their execution and trying to get off the gurney? Why am I seeing autopsies with 16 and 18 puncture wounds? And so this was what animated my research. The answer ended up being that book and things I did not know. I did not know that lethal injection has absolutely no science behind it whatsoever. I really thought, surely someone didn't just make this up off the top of their head. Surely this has science behind it, at least veterinary science, some kind of science. And the answer is no, it actually doesn't. It didn't. And I document this in the book, but there was a man. None of the scientists, none of the doctors wanted to help when they first came up with lethal injection in 1977. And the state of Oklahoma said, well, what about the state medical examiner? And he said he called himself an expert in dead bodies, but not an expert in how to get them that way. But he said, I'll help. And so he came up with this 3 drug protocol that every state, including Tennessee, used for the first 35 years of lethal injection. And I found an interview where he was asked, okay, how'd you come up with the 3 drugs? Because not one of those drugs is the drugs we use to put down pets. Not one of those drugs is the drugs that we use for physician-assisted suicide. And he said, I didn't do any research. I just thought about what might be useful. And, it goes on from there, but he literally made it up. And it's not just lethal injection's origin story. Oklahoma now uses, and a number of states do, use this first drug called midazolam. I think Tennessee did actually for a period of time, right? They were copying Oklahoma. And how did Oklahoma choose midazolam? Well, I got my hands on 3,000 pages of transcripts of interviews, internal interviews. And the person who came up with it was the lawyer for the Department of Corrections of Oklahoma. And he said, they said, how did you come up with midazolam? And he said, I did my own research. I looked online. I Googled it. I went past the WikiLeaks and I chose it. And, this is the sort of thing that we're seeing. So that's one thing. I didn't know that there's just no science behind this. I didn't know that lethal injection was torturous. It is. And I think, um, now Tennessee, I'm just going to be very specific about Tennessee. It uses the 1 drug protocol, which is called pentobarbital. And that actually is what we use on pets. It actually is what we use for physician-assisted suicide. And so, it's like, okay, problem solved, right? Wrong. It's not working in the same way. When you put down a pet, as any of you have had the sad happenstance to have to do that, you know that your pet is down in like 30 seconds. Right? They are gone. I just had to put my beloved Zoe down in May, 16 years old, and so I knew everything that was happening, but she's gone in 30 seconds. The average time for the 1 drug protocol, pentobarbital protocol, is 18 minutes, right? So this is very, very different. The physiology is different. Of course, human beings are different than cats and dogs. They're not using the same drugs, in part because drug manufacturers will not sell to them. So they're getting compounded versions, or and I think this is Tennessee, they're breaking private contracts that have no sale provisions on them. In the pet euthanasia circumstance, they're using a veterinarian. Do you know? Here's a shocker. Do you know who is actually pushing the syringes, who's actually doing lethal injection? It is prison guards. I thought it was doctors. It's prison guards, and they're doing it from another room, a little antechamber. They're pushing the syringe, and then the drugs go through 7 feet of tubing. So they're not doing it bedside. And if you ask them, how do you know how fast to push the plunger? Because if you push it too fast, it's going to blow the vein, which happens all the time. And they'll just say, we do it by feel, and the medical professionals are like, there is no feel. There's no feel from another room and 7 feet of tubing, and so it's very, very different. And by the way, there have actually been several studies, but the first one that really made a splash was in 2020. It considered every type of lethal injection protocol, every single type, including pentobarbital, which is what Tennessee is using now, and including the midazolam, which Tennessee used, and including the traditional one, which Tennessee used before that. And what it found was that 84% of all of these autopsies showed acute pulmonary edema. Now, pulmonary edema is when fluid seeps into the lungs, and acute pulmonary edema is when that happens in seconds and minutes rather than days and weeks and months. And as scientists have explained, I'm no scientist, but I am a good researcher. And as they have explained, this really has a lot to do with the pH of the human body. Our pH runs between a 7.35 and a 7.45. These drugs are either highly alkaline, that's pentobarbital, what Tennessee uses now. Its pH is between a 10 and 11 pH. Or midazolam, the sedatives, very acidic, their pH is between a 2 and a 3. In any event, what happens is when you inject this massive drug into the veins, when a drug is injected into the veins, it goes first to the heart and next to the lungs. And then it continues to move through the body. But normally the body does a really good job of buffering the difference in the pH. But normally we're not, injecting some massive bolus overdose all at the same time. And so what's happening is the body is trying to buffer this drug so that it can use it, but it's already stopped at the lungs. And the difference in the pH, that acidity or high alkaline, is chemically burning the little capillaries in the lungs, the little delicate capillaries, which makes the lungs leaky, which causes them to take on fluid. And so, as one court in Ohio said, we're basically waterboarding people to death. And for a while, Tennessee was using a paralytic. Now it would seem that the Department of Corrections is like, oh no, we don't do that anymore. We would know if they were suffering. But the science is very clear that someone can be feeling inside, but just drugged to oblivion, even without a paralytic, that they can't move. And if there's any question about that, one of the things that I think is most disturbing and most telling about the Tennessee protocol is that anesthesiologists said, look, whether you have a paralytic or whether you don't, if you want to know if someone's struggling, if you want to know if they're in torturous pain and trying to communicate that, even as they're being drugged to oblivion, look for little movements in the fingers, because the fine motor skills are the last to be paralyzed, either by, again, a paralytic or just being, drugged to oblivion. And so they said, this is the last place where you could have motor control. So look for someone trying to communicate by trying to move their fingers. What does Tennessee now do? Tennessee tapes down their fingers, and yeah. And I just have to say, as a researcher, they're already restrained in their wrists. There is absolutely no reason to tape down someone's fingers. And they didn't start doing it until the anesthesiologist said, look for their fingers. There's no reason to tape down your fingers other than they know it is a torturous death and they don't want you to be able to see it, and they don't want further prisoners to be their lawyers to be able to say, hey, look what happened, and to be able to challenge it. So let's see. Two other things. I guess I'm moving kind of quickly, but one question that people have had is, well, okay, well then get better drugs and get doctors and, fix it already. And I don't make an argument in this book. This was a book where I just relentlessly document what the states are doing in your name. But I will say it would be very, very difficult to read my book and think that lethal injection can be fixed in some way. And, one of the major problems is that the death row population is a geriatric population, as Stacy mentioned. They're all, elderly people. Mississippi executed a man this summer who had been on death row 50 years. 50 years. He's not even the same guy, right? Like, I just, it's incredible to me. But, the average time between death sentence and execution is 21 years. So it's going to be 2 decades. And in Q&A, I'd love to talk to you about why that is, but I'm going to keep moving for now. Got to lay some things so you can ask questions. But, this is a geriatric population with documented histories of poor health throughout their lives, many, many of whom are former IV users. And what I'm trying to say is you put all that together, and this is a population with notoriously weak veins. And now it's not my job to tell the state how to kill. But I got to tell you, if it were my job, the last possible way that I would come up with, the worst idea of them all, would be let's inject a huge amount of drugs into people with notoriously weak veins, and let's do it with completely unqualified people who have no medical training whatsoever. Let's see how that works out. And it's like, you're not going to be able to fix this. And very interestingly, the medical profession had come out back in 1890. There was a report that came out of New York when they were looking to change from hanging. It actually recommended the electric chair, but one of the methods that it considered was death by drugs. And they said that's not feasible for two reasons. One, the sustained objection of the medical community, and two, what they called anatomical difficulties. What they were saying is these people, like they knew 100 years ago that these people have really bad veins. So the other thing that I documented that I was shocked at, and I have to say I'm a former prosecutor. So I'm also a former sergeant in the Army. So I'm not particularly soft, but I documented breaking state laws, breaking federal laws, smuggling drugs into the country, falsifying prescriptions, changing expiration dates based on nothing, just doing it. And as Stacy mentioned, the people in Tennessee have now requested that information, and a court has said, yeah, you have to give it. A cautionary tale would be to just mention that this suit played out in Texas, and I'll tell you what happened. The trial court there found they had a little trial, and the trial court said you are breaking four different, state and federal laws, but I don't have the power to issue a stay. And what did the state of Texas do? It just executed the plaintiffs one by one. Oof, so much for that suit. And so, I really worry about Tennessee in that way. Okay, I'm going to stop there. 8:40. I'm going to do 5 more minutes, but now I'm going to talk a little bit about the death penalty more largely. So in the good news department, as Stacy said, death sentencing is down. I wanted to give you a little stat for that. It is down over 80% in the past 2 decades. So in 2004, there were 125 new death sentences across the United States. In 2024, which is the last year for which we have complete data, that number was 26, from 125 to 26. And here we are in this year when we're having a huge spike in executions. As Stacy talked about, what does the death sentencing look like? The last time I checked, and we have to wait for the end year data, but I'm asking around and staying in contact with people. It was 17. So I don't even know if we're going to get to 20 this year, which would mean we're down, another 10, 20%, even as executions are spiking. Um, and let's see. I think I will just say what state's response has been to that is, oh, the juries aren't giving us our death sentences. So we're going to take this very uneven landscape and we're going to skew it even more. And so, for example, in Florida, Florida had unanimous jury sentencing, just like everybody else in the country. Well, Parkland shooting happened, and the jury gave life. The jury gave multiple life sentences. And what did Florida do? Change the law. Now you can get a death sentence in Florida with a jury vote of 8-4. So, and then also there's a case that's before the Supreme Court right now. The Supreme Court just agreed to take it, and it's about intellectual disability. Now, in my mind, and I think in Americans' mind more largely, we are told, states say it, courts say it, Supreme Court has said it, and officials say it, that the death penalty is for the worst of the worst. It's the worst of the worst out there, right? And we all think about, I don't know, Hitler or I don't know, Jeffrey Dahmer or something like that. But the fact of the matter is, that's actually not the bread and butter of the death penalty. My little niece was visiting. She just left yesterday. She's from Florida, and she said, Aunt Karina, what does it take to get the death penalty? Like, what is that? And I said, it's not your Jeffrey Dahmers. The bread and butter of the death penalty is people who had bad lawyers. I mean, that's it. And I think I will. Oh, and I was starting to talk about intellectual disability because the Supreme Court just took a case. The Supreme Court in 2002 said you can't execute people who are intellectually disabled. By definition, you're not the worst of the worst. You're intellectually disabled. Well, that was part of the bread and butter of the death penalty. And that is part of the reason we've seen these death sentences go down. And states have done all that they can. They've defined intellectual disability very, very narrowly. And so now we've got a challenge. It's on the surface, it looks very narrow, but it would allow states to just blow a hole in this ruling. And, I look at these moves and say, yes, it's for me, it's sickening, but also it is a tell. It is a tell. It's like you're not getting the death sentences, and so I have to skew that ground even more. And I think what I'll end with is the notion of desert. Shoot, I think no, I'll save dessert, but I want to. We should all save dessert now, shouldn't we? But I'll save that topic. But I'll end with a stat because I came through Louisiana and there was a study. Over 13,000 Black men had been murdered, first degree murders, since 1976, from 1976 to 2016, right? In that 40-year period of time. Over 13,000 Black men. How many white people had been executed for killing a Black man? Actually, the question actually is how many people have been executed, period, for killing a Black man? The answer is three. Three. And I just looked up before we came how many, most murders are intra-racial, Black on Black, white on white. And so where you really see the racism is intra-racial. And Stacy, as you were talking, I decided to look up, All right, how many we've had over 1,600 executions in the past 40 years or 50 years. How many people, how many white people have been executed for killing a black person? Of all of those people, the answer is 21 of over 1,600. So I'll stop there. I do think the question of, they deserve it, so we don't need to talk about it anymore. I think that needs a lot more treatment, but I also want to hear what you want to talk about. So thanks for listening.
Thank you both so much. And just a reminder, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. Let's see. Karina, do you think research will motivate states to choose different forms of execution? Would you consider that an improvement?
Mm. Um, I think states are considering other forms of execution and going there. And sadly, it has nothing to do with my research. I don't think my research is making any difference in that regard. States are moving to other alternatives, and they're doing so out of desperation. They're doing so because they can't get the drugs, because they can't get people, because they're seeing these terrible botched executions. And so I think that's what's going on. Do I think it's an improvement? You know, I'm like, from whose perspective? From whose perspective? And so let me just say this. In the state of Tennessee, Tennessee is very unique. There's only two states that I know of that do this. They allow the prisoners to choose how they will be executed. And from 2018 to 2024, 7 people executed, 5 of them chose the electric chair over lethal injection. And when they were asked why, wait a minute, I thought lethal injection was supposed to be the most humane. I thought they just fall into forever sleep. It's a death like any of us would want, right? What they said is no, we had good lawyers. We've seen the studies. We know the research. Both deaths are going to be torturous. Our best move is to make it quick. People in South Carolina, 2 of them, have also chosen the firing squad for the same reason. Now, so it may be, quote, an improvement for the person being executed, but let's just think about that. That's not to say one is a humane death. It's torturous, which is going to be the least torturous, which is going to kill me the fastest. But both of those have real downsides for the executioners. And so one of the things we saw in South Carolina was the second death by firing squad. South Carolina has 3 shooters, 10 to 15 feet away, very, very close, no blanks. And the second killing by firing squad, they only found 2 bullets in the autopsy, not 3. I've seen the autopsy photos, and the state had the audacity to say, oh, that's because 2 bullets went in the exact same hole. I mean, it's laughable. And you can look and see, like you would see different angles, like it's clearly 1 bullet. They just didn't have anything to say. But the other 2 bullets, by the way, neither one of them went into the heart. They both went into the gut. And people are talking about, they clearly did that on purpose. I agree. The question is why? Were they, as some say, intending to inflict torturous death? Because this person, Mahdi, died slowly and was groaning. He bled out through his belly. And so he was a man of color who killed a police officer, a white police officer. So, maybe they were trying. My view is a bit different. I think one of those shooters said, I'm not killing this guy. I'm not doing it. And I think the other 2 shooters, and I can't prove any of this. I'll tell you what I can prove and what I can't. But I think the other 2 said, fine, I'll shoot him. But I'm not going to go to the Lord with a murder on my hands. I'm not doing it. So it's that explicitness makes it very, all the more difficult for executioners.
Stacy, I have a question for you. Has the Innocence Project had any influence on this topic?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there is, the Innocence Project that is headquartered in New York, and now there is a Tennessee Innocence Project as well, and they work together, but they're different entities.
Mhm.
Thus far, the Tennessee Innocence Project has not been particularly involved with a death penalty case. But certainly the Innocence Project in New York has, and has been in Tennessee for the case of Purpose Payne, who finally was removed from death row. That was based on intellectual disability, however. He has very strong innocence claims. There was a man named Sedley Alley who we executed without testing the DNA evidence, and we have tried to get that tested posthumously, and the state won't allow that. But yes, I mean they have helped peel back the layers, the things we used to count on. We say, oh, they confessed. Oh, there was an eyewitness that said, well, what the Innocence Project has really been able to show with all of the biological evidence that they use is that actually about 25% of the people who we've exonerated confessed. Right? And this other I don't know the statistic right off the top of my head, but numbers of people who identify, oh, yes, that's who I saw, that was not who they saw. So it's really shown a light on all of the things that have led to these wrongful convictions and how things that we thought were ironclad are not. Um,
Mhm.
you know, even beyond innocence, when you're talking about culpability, and we have a man on Tennessee's death row who we have felony murder in Tennessee, which means that you can get the death penalty if you were participating in a felony and someone dies, even if you are not the person who caused the death.
Mhm.
So we have a man on Tennessee's death row named Kevin Burns, who a date has been requested. And Kevin was with some guys, had no idea what was going on. The other two guys got in an altercation, shots fired, people died. They got life sentences and have parole eligibility. Kevin, who never fired a shot, is on death row and has an execution date potentially coming up within the next couple of years. So when you get down into these layers of what's actually happening and who's actually going to death row, um, to Karina's point about the worst of the worst, it's
Yes.
often the people that have the least ability to be represented, whether that's their attorney, whether that's their mental health, whether that there's all these things, but that tends to be who ends up on death row.
Hmm. Is there such a thing as a clemency standard?
I mean, what governors love to say, or at least Tennessee governors, I won't speak for other governors, in my experience doing this now for 25 years, is they are looking for some error, some huge error in the process that they can point to say, I have to remedy this error, right? Now, we've given them lots of errors over the years that they've chosen to ignore. But the reality is, clemency can be given by a governor for any reason the governor wants. And constitutionally, I mean, mercy is a reason for clemency, is absolutely to show mercy. And so with Harold Nichols in his situation, that's really what we were asking for, because Harold is someone who, at the time of his arrest, admitted to everything, was remorseful from the beginning, pled guilty at his trial, knowing he could get a death sentence. Um, and has done nothing but been remorseful and worked to become a better person. And he has over the last 35 years. So now I will say Harold did, the district attorney of Hamilton County, Chattanooga, in 2018, because of a court ruling, agreed Harold should get life without parole and not the death penalty. And everybody had signed off on it. They were agreed to it. They were called into the to the judge, to the court, for the judge to just basically rubber stamp it. The judge, there was a bunch of media in the courtroom, and the judge said, nope. And he chewed both sides out and said, I'm not accepting this. And so these are the kind of things, for me, that's a process problem. Like, but the governor doesn't seem to think it is. But
Mm.
the governor can do it for whatever reason a governor wants to.
Mhm.
And we don't have, our parole board does not have to weigh in. Other states needs the parole board, the governor does, ours does not.
Interesting. We're close to finishing our scheduled time. But are there any things now that you had a little bit more time, Karina or Stacy, that you would like to say? Dessert, for instance, whatever that
Yes,
may
if you
be.
don't mind, like that is the one thing that I've heard so much. And frankly, I grew up in Montana, and Montana is just not that different from Texas, and I didn't think about the death penalty much. And I would have said, if somebody had, asked me, I would have said, yeah, I support the death penalty. They deserve it. If you don't like the death penalty, don't commit murder. And it's that simple. And I feel like that is actually the thin little thread that holds the death penalty today, is that we don't go into all of the other things, and we just say, well, you shouldn't have committed murder. So I have three little responses to that. One is whether or not someone deserves to die. Even if I'm going to disagree with you, but even if I were to agree with you, that's only half of the equation. The other half of the equation is, did the state do what it needs to do to deserve to take that life? Right? Like, just because someone commits murder, you don't just get to drag them out and kill them on the spot. You have to, the state has things that it needs to do. We are under a rule of law, right? And so, at least that's, my work as a law professor and as a researcher. Really, I think it would be very hard to read that book and to see all the things, and Tennessee is all over that book, but to read it and say, oh, yeah, I can trust the state. You can't trust the state, to conduct this. That's my first answer. My second is, who gets it? Who does deserve it? It's people with poor legal representation, oftentimes um, uh, racial minorities, people from Black and brown communities, always poor people.
Mhm.
In 1972, Justice Douglas said, there's never been a rich person on death row, and there never will be. Here we are over 50 years later, and it is true. Never been a rich person on death row. And then my third thing is redemption. And this was one of the things that I was really surprised about in my research. Studying lethal injection is studying executions. And studying executions gave me this front row seat of who these people are at the end. Not who they were at the time of their terrible crime, not who they were at trial, but who are they 35 years later? This is the stuff that Stacy is working with. But as a researcher, I was like, what? They're not the same person.
Mhm.
They're not. And you don't have to have a faith to understand that the human heart can change and that we can change. But I especially want to speak to people of faith and say, hey, that redemption thing that you talk about, it's real, you know? So I'll
We do
stop.
have one more question. How much influence do the victims' relatives have on a death penalty sentence?
Mm.
Huge, huge. I mean,
It's a one-way ratchet, though, wouldn't you say?
well, I mean, I think Harold is, I think if the crime is horrible, and so my heart is so broken for these families who have waited 35 years, and with the belief that the state has continued to give to them, that this is what they need, and that if they truly love their loved one, this is what they should demand, right? And they've bought into that because they're traumatized and they're in so much pain and they're trapped in that space for decades upon decades. And so the sister of Karen Pooley, who was murdered by Harold Nichols, is determined that he should die. And I think that Governor Lee, even with lots and lots of reasons that there were and are to allow Harold to live out his life inside. I mean, Harold would die in prison. Um, but that voice of the family saying we want this is very difficult for politicians to overcome because we do have to remember these are politicians. Um,
Mhm.
and so I think, um, that it's so that is a very powerful voice when we get to this point, for sure.
I would just say that what I have seen, I agree with everything you said. It's a one-way ratchet. In Alabama this summer, you could look this
Oh,
up.
yeah,
Victim's son wrote an op-ed because he said, "Listen, we didn't want the death penalty. We wanted forgiveness, and if you really care about victims, I need him alive so that I can work through this forgiveness." It was a beautiful op-ed. And he said, the state of Alabama ignored me. My wife found out on Facebook that they had set a date. Otherwise, I wouldn't have even known.
that's
And
100% true. Yes, that's right.
and then he asked the governor, okay, when the governor Ivy said, no, we're going to kill him anyway, he said, well, can I meet with him first? Can I have one meeting so I can find out what happened, so I can work through this forgiveness? And the governor said no. So in my mind, it's a very one-way ratchet. When the victim wants it, you use it. When the victim does not, time and time again, they get ignored.
They do. That's true. That's right.
Well, on that note, if we could all just say thank you to our
Oh,
wonderful speakers. Thank you so much. And as a reminder to everyone, please tell people you know that we'll put a recording probably in a few days. The person who posts things for us is actually away for a few days, but I'll let you all know when it's available, and I'll be on our Facebook and our website. And again, thank you very much for a stimulating and sober and enlightening conversation. And
Thank
with
you,
that,
Marilyn.
thank
good
you,
night.
everybody.
Yeah.
Thanks so
Thanks
much.
everyone for coming.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye.